You're muted.
No, what happened?
Okay, she's not going to be here. She left me to record the meeting, but she's leaving. It's all up to you. She's gonna watch the video tomorrow. She has no internet.
Are you serious?
Yep.
No pressure.
Yep.
No pressure at all. I was already nervous enough, but here we go.
Yeah.
So it's all you.
Yeah.
All right, so I kind of want to do what Jacqueline did and ask questions. So I guess I can briefly run through the facts really quick, like a summary, and then start asking questions, and then we can go from there. Does that work for everybody?
Do you want to do a quick poll first, like just to start?
Yeah. Okay. So.
Just so we know.
All right. Good idea. All right. So, do we have everybody? No. Oh God. Okay.
Well, Jeff's not going to be here, and she's not going to be here because Jeff has no power. So.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
In the class, do we know?
Okay. So, by a show of hands, who thinks the judgment in the the People versus Sparkle Daniel case should be, or the reversal, I might say, should be upheld, or who thinks that the reversal was incorrect?
Which one are we raising our hand for? Upheld or incorrect?
All right. Who thinks the verdict should be upheld? The reversal should be upheld? Nobody?
I do. I just can't figure out how to raise my hand because now I have all these extra buttons.
I don't think you have it because you're the host. So I don't think you can raise your hand. You can physically raise your hand.
All right. So Kyle is the only one that thinks the judgment, the reversal on the Sparkle Daniel case should be upheld. I'm with Kyle, so there's two of us.
I'm undecided. I felt like it could go either way for me.
Okay, so
I thought both were good and I couldn't choose.
Okay, so we have, I think, three then. I have me, you're undecided, and this is Caitlin's undecided.
Yeah, I'm actually undecided as well.
And John is undecided.
I am undecided as well.
And Alyssa's undecided. Oh, this is good then. It's gonna be a good discussion,
I'm on the side with Kyle.
And Chris, you're with Kyle and me? Okay. Chris, Kyle, Tiffany. Should be upheld. So who is against it? Let's see. Melissa, are you against it? And I don't know if she can hear me. Melissa, can you hear me? Are you against the... So you're muted. You're muted.
It should be upheld. I cannot find the option to raise my hand.
Oh, okay, so it should be upheld.
Yes.
So you're with me and Kyle. And then Jacqueline, you're with?
Appellants.
You're with appellants? The people?
Yes, the people.
Okay. So you think it should be reversed. And then, Yusan, what's your feeling? You're muted. Sorry. I can't hear you.
I'm late because hospital follow-up, so...
Oh, no worries.
I don't know what's going on here.
Do you think the decision in the People versus Sparkle Daniel case, do you think the decision should be upheld, the one that reversed the lower court's decision and threw out the unmirandized testimony?
Oh, actually, I don't remember procedural history, but I do not agree. I mean, actually, pre-Miranda warning, what is it? I'm for actually Daniel.
You're for Sparkle Daniel. So it's
yes.
Okay, so you're with us. Okay, so you son. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 1, 2, 3, undecided, and then I think 2 for or Jacqueline, I think you might be the only one upholding. All right, did I get everybody? I think so. I think I got everyone that's here. Okay, so first, we all know the facts, right? We all read the case and the supplements. So Sparkle Daniel was arrested due to an informant who called her friend, her ex-friend, who called and said she's involved in the murder of Nellie Holcutt. She was arrested in Brooklyn and taken 45 minutes to the Bronx, and she was not given any Miranda warning, but she was supposed to be given a Miranda warning. They then took her to a holding cell and then put her in an interview room and did not give her a Miranda warning until she began to incriminate herself. Reading the record, there's a lot of conflicting information. So I thought that would be relevant in discussing those discrepancies. So the first question I had there were two versions of the story. There were first the two initial suspects, which were Mr. Regent and his girlfriend, which is Nellie Holcutt's granddaughter, and Larissa Kirby. For the people who are, well, let's rewind. For the people who said that they are for upholding the decision, do you know, is there a particular reason why you're for upholding the decision? Kyle, I'll start with you because you're my friend.
I think I voted to uphold the decision just because I don't see the logic in the state's argument, because the statement was solicited out of the person where they purposely questioned him in a way that would force her to make a statement that would incriminate herself. And there's also another issue, which we haven't talked about yet, but whether the issue is a mixed question of fact and law. Because if it's a mixed question of fact and law, the Court of Appeals can't even hear the issue.
Okay, got it. And then we have Melissa. What were your reasons for upholding the decision?
The argument that the defendant did was really good, and I don't know too much about criminal law, but for the facts that I read from the case, it seems like whenever this person was handcuffed on the street on Brooklyn and taken to Bronx, at that moment that person should have been Mirandized, and she wasn't. So okay. That's why.
Okay, and then Chris.
Yeah, I just thought the argument was more persuasive as far as for the defendant. I thought they also brought up an interesting question with the mix of fact and law. And I mean, I agreed with basically the whole argument of the defendant.
Okay. Thank you. And then Yusan.
Actually, I didn't have enough time to kind of organize what I'm thinking. Actually, I read through Daniel and actually co-defendant's brief.
Mm.
Similarly, issue was pre-Miranda exchange. So what I felt reading through, they gave them, I mean, a defendant Miranda warning after interrogation, I guess. So I think that's violation of Miranda warning. So that's my opinion.
All right, thank you, Yusan. Okay, and then the people who I'm interested from hearing from Jacqueline first, and the people who are undecided. So, Jacqueline, why would you sustain or you wouldn't find that the pre-Mirandized and post-Mirandized statements warrant the verdict being thrown out?
The biggest argument that I saw that made the most sense to me was the fact that the questions that were initially asked that were pre-Miranda weren't really interrogation. It was just bland questioning. I mean, this murder happened, I was trying to find it, 4 years prior, I believe. So this is something that police officers got a tip on 4 years later. They handcuffed the person, which makes me a little bit, that's where I'm a little flexible in leaning more towards supporting that they should have Mirandized her, because being put in handcuffs that's an emotional thing. That's something that is going to intimidate you and put you in a mode where even if they ask you what's the weather, it's going to be an interrogation to you. It's going to feel that way. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm a little flexible, but basically all they did was put her in a room. They asked her about something that happened 4 years ago. And initially she said, no, I don't know what you're talking, because all he said was, do you know what you're doing here? And she's like, no, I don't. So I don't see how.
Does it sway you a little bit more, the fact that he did make that statement and then he left the room and came back and said, you know why you're here? And then she incriminated herself and then he Mirandized her?
Well, that just gave her, like I said, this is 4 years later. So he asked the question, left, because he didn't leave it wasn't part of an interrogation tactic. He left because somebody pulled him out of the room real quick because he had to go do something. So it wasn't like that was something that he intended to do as an interrogation. And when he came back, he just re-asked her the same question, like, do you know why I'm here? Because it is 4 years later. And she did say, oh, yes, now that I've had a minute to think about it and I'm in an interrogation room, I remember that. But she still didn't even say anything incriminating. She just said, yes, I remember that. And after that, and I don't remember what the other statement was, she said something like, yes, I remember something about a phone call, about calling the aunt. And then he said, hold on 1 minute before you say anything else, let me Mirandize you. Because at that point, all she had said was, yes, I remember that murder happened, which she could have meant, yeah, I remember because I saw the news. It doesn't mean, yes, I remember because I did it. It's just, yes, I remember that, and I know the person.
Okay, and then we have a hand, Caitlin, and then Yusan.
I'm just a little confused about, I guess, like, when she should have been Mirandized. I know that you don't have to be Mirandized when you're arrested. You just have to be Mirandized once you're being interrogated, I think. I just want to make sure.
You're supposed to get your Miranda warnings once there's a custodial interrogation. So you're interrogated while you're in custody. So the question is, there's a couple questions, but one is, when did the interrogation begin?
Okay.
So we don't know. There's a discrepancy, and I'm happy you brought that up. There's a discrepancy with regard to when she actually was interrogated, because when she was plucked off the street, it was a 45-minute ride to the Bronx, and the police said that no conversation happened in the car, but if somebody's getting plucked off the street and they don't know why, and that's we don't know if that's believable or not.
I was also just a little confused because I believe it was the respondent's brief said, I don't remember what case it was, but they said that because of how long it took for them to get to the holding cell and for how long she was in the holding cell, that she should have been read her rights during that time. I just want to know if I was understanding that correctly.
No, you're right. So they're saying that it was from she was plucked off the street in the Bronx or in Brooklyn until the last statement. It was a continuous event. So it wasn't, if, like, let's say there was a break in between, you know, one of each of the three components. I think there was 3 interviews. Mm-hmm. So if there was a break, a substantial break, then the taint, they say, like, you know, the un-Mirandized statement, the taint is dissipated. So if there was
they argue because there was a meal, like she had a meal,
and for like 2 hours,
30 minutes. So yeah.
So they're arguing that it was a continuous thing, and the other side is saying no, it wasn't continuous. There were several breaks in between. Mm-hmm. Yusan? Or Yusan, put your hand down.
All right. According to brief for defendant respondent redacted, page number 5 to 6. When detective asked the defendant, you know what I'm talking about, defendant replied yes and started talking about having gone to her aunt's house on Raconia Avenue and having asked Ms. Nellie to use her telephone. Detective stopped the defendant and read the Miranda warning to her. So already she started to explain what happened at that point before
she was
Miranda warning, actually.
All right, so I'm supposed to be impartial. So do you think that that they're one of the basically, if the police don't think that the person is going to make an incriminating statement, is what the record is reflecting, they don't have to give you your Miranda warnings right away, if I'm understanding that correctly. So do you think that just by them asking her, you know, do you know why you're here, or you know why you're here, do you think they would expect that to elicit such incriminating statements for her to just start babbling about, you know, knowing about the house and everything that happened that day?
Trying to find it in the record.
Kyle?
I don't have a hand button. Well, I think the major issue is also that you have to look at it according to the case law objectively, not subjectively. And the state is kind of putting more of a subjective spin on it when it really should be objective. A reasonable person, when they're asked, do you know why you're here and you're in a police station, you've already been arrested, taken in handcuffs, placed in a police car, placed in an interrogation room, is going to perceive that they're being interrogated for a crime.
Even though she wasn't told why she was being placed in the police car?
Why else would you be placed in a police car and in an interrogation room?
Maybe she's a witness and they want to know what she knows. Maybe, you know, something happened to someone in her family. Who knows?
But that's a possibility. But thinking of it objectively, people dislike the police and think every time that the police are involved in anything that they've automatically done something wrong. I think any ordinary person without a legal education would believe that if they were placed in an interrogation room or taken by the police in a police car, that they were they're a suspect for some crime.
Okay. Caitlin, I want to hear from you because you're undecided. And I want to know, unless you already, I think you already explained to me why you were undecided, right?
I think my biggest issue is, you know, I did think that the respondent's brief was more persuasive and more well-written, but the reply is where I was a little, I think, is what makes me undecided. Because in the reply from the state, I believe that they said that it's an objective standard, but they said that it's an objective standard from the police's perspective. Mm-hmm. So the police have to feel if what they're saying would need to be Mirandized or not. So I guess from a police standpoint, I could see objectively viewing the statement that Sparkle Daniel made as not incriminating at all. But I could see from Sparkle's standpoint of, you know, being arrested, being in a holding cell, sitting in an interrogation room as that being interrogated. So she should have been read her. So that's where I'm at, is I see both sides.
Got it. Jacqueline?
So she was handcuffed, but she was never arrested. Like, she was never put under arrest. The police never told her, you're under arrest because of blah, blah, blah. They just handcuffed her, put her in the car, brought her to the station. At least that's what the records reflect. And like Caitlin just said, it is an objective standard from where the detective stands. And when the detectives brought her down to the station, it's all the detectives had was an anonymous call from a woman that said that an elderly woman had been killed from 2003, so it was a long time ago. Detectives get phone calls, cops get phone calls about ridiculous crap and ridiculous hints all the time. Why they put her in handcuffs is questioning to me, because I don't understand why they did that. They could have just coerced her into coming down to the station. I don't understand why handcuffs needed to get involved, but I wasn't there, so I don't know, and that's not in the record. But they had no reason to believe that she would incriminate herself. They just had a tip about something, and they had specifics. So they had some reason to think, because there were specifics involved. But when they were just asking her like simple questions like, do you know why you're here? They're not expecting her to be like, yes, I did it, I committed a murder. And if she were to start saying something like that, like we see in the record, she started saying stuff that might incriminate her, the detective stopped her and read her Miranda. But just asking plain questions like, you know, do you remember anything? It was like 3 years ago. And then if you just say yes or no answers, they're just asking open-ended questions.
All right. Got it. John?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm hung up as well. At first, you look at it and you say, objectively speaking, just based on the case law, you know, maybe it really isn't an interrogation. However, when you look on the other side of it, I mean, she was handcuffed. The other things going on, I mean, what, like Kyle was saying previously, I mean, the reasonable person would assume that she was being interrogated. So that's kind of where I'm in the middle with everything.
Got it. And then
even if she thought she was being interrogated, that's not the standard that needs to be given. It's the standard of whether the detective realized that this was going from just simple questioning to an interrogation. It's when he thought, not when she thought, because obviously, like we've all come to terms, as soon as he put the handcuffs on her, she thought, you know, any person would think, I'm in trouble, uh-oh. So it's when the detective, the line crossed for the detective.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to with a single continuous act. That doesn't start when she's handcuffed and continues throughout, or does that break constitute it breaking it up? You know, once again, like I said, that's kind of where I'm hung up.
Does it sway you guys any further or either way that if the question that you guys are hung up on is whether the custodial interrogation began on the street, whether it began in the precinct, if that's a question of law and fact, it's a mixed question of law and fact, then under criminal procedure rules, the court is not allowed to hear that question and was right in dismissing the case. Does that affect your decisions either way?
That definitely affects my decision. If it's a question of law and fact, we shouldn't even be sitting here.
Exactly. So Jacqueline, are you back to our side?
If that's the case, then I would totally be on your side.
Okay. We might have swayed Jacqueline. And then any of the undecided that feel a little more inclined to rule a different way now that the record is...
That would sway my decision too, because if we're not supposed to be hearing it, then...
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as well.
Yeah.
Definitely would change things for me.
All right, so we have Caitlin and we have Don. How about Alyssa?
Yes,
I haven't heard from you, Alyssa.
I would definitely be swayed for sure. The thing that I was really struggling with was the fact that her statements prior to being Mirandized didn't, really incriminate her. But as a result, I can definitely see how, she was interrogated. So I think I'm, definitely more towards your side. After our discussion, and, I was kind of on the fence with it anyway, but after our discussion, really, I think so.
Got it. Okay, so we have the 3 undecided. We have Jacqueline. I'm doing a good job as a judge, guys. I got us all on the same page, I think. Kyle?
I kind of agree where everyone's going, though, but there is an exception to the mixed question of fact and law issue. If the determination of the appellate division is not supported by the facts on the record, the court then can hear a question that's mixed of fact and law. It's in the appellant's brief reply on page 4.
So do you think the facts in the record support that it's a mixed question of law or fact? Do you think, or?
Well, I think that it has to support the facts of the record have to support the holding of the appellate division. I think they do, but I'm just saying that maybe some of the people that were on the fence might not.
Might not. Okay. So after Kyle said that, does anybody on the fence think the facts of the record do not support that finding? Or whether it was a mixed question of law and fact?
I don't know. There just seems to be a lot of questions with the record, like, for me anyway, like, why did they handcuff her? Why? What was said in that car? Like you said, like, it was a 45-minute drive. What did they say to her? That's just, there's a lot of facts that are questionable even with reading the record.
Mm-hmm.
So if that means that the court could hear it because the facts are still questionable, then maybe I'm back on the other side.
Okay, so we're going to put Jacqueline back on the other side.
Well, I wouldn't so much as say that the facts are questionable. It's just that the record itself does not support the holding of the appellate division. That gives the court the jurisdiction then, because it doesn't matter if it's a mixed question of fact and law.
So the record, there's a lot of conflicting information in the record. So the record says that there was, there was initially Mr. Regents, he was a suspect, him and his girlfriend, or his girlfriend was a suspect. He had called and reported her. He was also a narcotics informant. Larissa Kirby, which I'm having a real issue with Larissa Kirby. I don't know about anyone else, but I don't think Larissa Kirby is her real name. She was on probation for, I believe it was 5 months. Her house was raided. She was trying to smuggle marijuana into jail to see her husband, who she married in jail. There was a $12,000 reward that she claims that she found out about afterwards. She was getting, I think it was $1.5K towards her rent, towards back rent, money for her phone bill. And I believe the police had tapped phone conversations with her and Sparkle Daniel. And I feel like they completely ignored the Regents suspects, when the Regent suspects, the record reflects, was their story was more comported to how the crime took place, because they had mentioned that it was a social drinking of scotch and wine. And Sparkle Daniel, her account of the story was, well, she got wine poured down her throat, and that did not comport with what actually happened.
Well, the record, the autopsy actually found that there was no wine poured down her throat. It wasn't actually alcohol that you would drink. It was actually like poisonous alcohol. So it wasn't wine that was poured down her throat. So if Sparkle Daniel states that.
I think there was a mix of scotch and the alcohol, like the poisoning alcohol. I think they found both, if I remember correctly, if I could find it.
Okay.
It's in the appendix.
Yeah, that's what I'm scrolling through. There's so many pages.
I'm pretty sure it was both. I also think with Larissa Kirby, there was an issue with why she called Crime Stoppers.
Yeah, that was an issue.
Sparkle contacted her husband in jail and she was angry. So I think there's credibility issues there. Oh, Rachel, we have you. Yay. Okay. Let me ask, while you're doing that, Jacqueline, let me see what Rachel thinks. What do you think, Rachel, about the decision in the Sparkle Daniel case? Do you think that the decision reversing the case and ordering a new trial, do you think that should be upheld, or are you against that?
I think it should be upheld. I got here late, but I was agreeing with what Caitlin was saying. But I was, kind of borderline because I think that maybe it shouldn't be before the court because of the facts, but I'm not sure. But originally I was thinking it should be upheld.
It should be upheld. Okay. Does it make a difference to anybody that the police, especially in New York, are required to give a Miranda warning before each custodial interrogation? So their manual states Miranda warnings are required and should be given before each custodial interrogation. That's stated in their manual, in their police manual. That's the first thing that's stated. Does that weigh on anybody that they didn't? They took her into custody and asked her questions. She was in custody. She was in four walls. She was in the jail. She was in the interrogation room. Does that have any weight with anyone that they didn't give her Miranda warnings, even though they're required to do so? They know they're supposed to do so.
Before an interrogation, not just plain questioning. An interrogation room, I know we're calling it an interrogation room, but in reality, it's actually titled an interview room because that's what it begins as. It begins as an interview room. They bring witnesses in there to interview them. It's not, obviously you were pre-handcuffed and you were brought into the room. So obviously it's a different atmosphere than police just asking if you could sit down to ask a few questions. It's obviously a different emotion that's going to be felt, but it is an interview room, not an interrogation room that she was brought into. And she wasn't interrogated. She was just asked simple questions. Do you know why you're here? That's it.
Well, couldn't an argument be made that she was incriminating herself from the moment she was asked her name on the streets in Brooklyn, because they were looking for Sparkle Daniel. They asked her name. That incriminated her. That led them to them placing her in handcuffs and placing her in the back of the police car. And then once she got to the interrogation room or the interview room, they said, "Do you know why you're here?" And then he took a break, came back. It was like a brief pause, like you said. He didn't leave, intentionally as part of an interrogation. But when he came back, he said, "You know why you're here." And that's when everything started to crumble. At that point, they had her in custody for, I think it was maybe an hour or two. So does that change your mind, or?
Doesn't that also go back to the issue of that the cop is required to give Miranda if he believes he's interrogating, and so he has to be based on his objective belief. But what would a cop objectively believe when they're saying, "Do you know why you're here?" That's not like a question of, "Oh, hi, how are you?" Things like that. It's not an open-ended question. It's a specific question to try and get information out of the person that can be used against them. So I think objectively a cop would see that as an interrogation, so he would be required to follow his manual and give Miranda.
Which is true, but the reason why he had her in the room was off of a tip from somebody that, as we've stated, is not the most reliable human being in the universe. So the cop is basing all of the reason why she's there off of a could be bogus tip. So he has this girl in the room. He doesn't even know if she knows anything about anything. So asking her, "Do you know why you're here?" She could have said to him at that moment, she could have said, "I have no idea why I'm here. I don't know why I don't know." And then he would have had to Mirandize her and give her more information, because he would have said, "You're here because of this lady being murdered." And that's it. So just by asking, "Do you know why you're here?" he doesn't know that she's going to be like, "Yes, I murdered someone," or "Yes, I know." He doesn't know what the answer is objectively. He has no idea. He's just going off of a crazy person's tip.
But then it goes back to your issue of, she was placed in handcuffs prior to it. I know we don't know why. But the cop must have had some reliance on the witness's statement, even though we have all this stuff that discredits the witness. He must have believed her some way. Otherwise, he never would have put her in handcuffs.
And to add to what Kyle just said, the record reflects, and I believe it's the appellant's appendix, that and this is the defense attorney trying to get this out of, I think it was Officer Caspy, but it shows that the level of the treatment that they gave to Larissa Kirby showed that they believed, they tried to say that it showed that she was credible because of how they treated her, because of, the fact that they paid her phone bill and relied on her to get the conversation with Sparkle Daniel. So, and they paid her rent, they paid for countless other things. So it shows that they relied on her. So if you're asking that question, I feel like you already have that belief set in your head when you say, why you're here. So objectively, he would be thinking, she's, you're already guilty to me.
Well, this is the second statement. That's what he said. Because first he said, do you know why you're here? Mm-hmm. And then the second time he came in, the subsequent question was, do you know what I'm talking about now? Is what I have. Not, you know why you're here. That's different than, do you know why you're here now? Like, now that it's been 10 minutes because I got pulled out of the room and you've had a minute to sit in this room, do you know why I'm here now?
Okay, so she said he told her she knew what he was talking about. That's what I have here.
I'm still looking for the alcohol stuff.
Tiffany, can I add?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, I was looking at the hand. Sorry, guys.
Oh, as I told you before, brief for defendant respondent redacted, that is kind of different. So after detective asked 2 questions, defendant started talking about having gone to her aunt's house and having asked Ms. Nelly to use her telephone. And then detective stopped the defendant and read the Miranda warning to her. So even though a conflicting fact, but according to the brief, said more about defendant's statement before the Miranda warning given to her. So you can read page 5 and 6, I think.
Right, I'm doing that right now.
Yeah, 5 and 6.
So you're saying that the pre and post Miranda interrogations, you're agreeing with pages 5 and 6 and saying that it was a continuous event?
I think so.
Okay. All right. I want to ask you guys, because I want to play devil's advocate because I'm supposed to be impartial, even though I think it should be upheld. But the court had laid out factors, or I'm sorry, the brief had laid out factors that it's basically is like an exception to the requirement for the pre and post Miranda statement. So it said the time differential, the factors they'll consider is the time differential between the Miranda violation and the subsequent admission, whether the same police personnel were present and involved in eliciting each statement, whether there was a change in the location or nature of the interrogation, the circumstances surrounding the Miranda violation, such as the extent of the improper questioning, and whether prior to the Miranda violation, defendant had indicated a willingness to speak to the police. So under these factors, couldn't it be argued that this was a continuous event because these factors are satisfied? She was left in the same place, the same police interrogated her, Like there was no change in location. Whether to willingness to speak to police. And they said also whether prior to the Miranda violation, defendant had indicated a willingness to speak to the police, which we know that she did not indicate a willingness to speak with the police from the first encounter when I think she told them to go, F themselves. So when they asked her name. But suddenly when she got transported in the car for 45 minutes and she got to the police station, she was all of a sudden willing to speak. And then another thing, the time differential, I mean, there were significant breaks in the interrogation process, if you want to call it that. We're not sure if it's an interrogation or not. That's what we're arguing. But she did have lunch for 2 hours, I think it was. I think it was 2 hours and a few minutes, the record reflects. And then there were other time breaks. She wasn't interviewed immediately. She was placed in a holding cell at first. She was then brought to the interview room. So for the supporters of upholding the decision, does it affect your decision or weigh in any way the fact that there was substantial breaks in the process, so it could be seen as not being a continuous event? My question might be confusing because I asked long-winded questions. Kyle?
Well, doesn't it negate that issue because she was really never left alone? The entire time there's always someone in the interrogation or interview room, whatever you want to call it, in the room with her. So I think that eliminates like the whole issue of being continuous breaks because she was never given a moment where she was not under interrogation. As the brief says, is because she was always in the presence of a police officer. It's like that she was constantly under supervision and under interrogation.
She was left alone in the interrogation room when Detective, whatever his name is, McSloan, left for...
Was there someone with her, though? I remember it saying someone stayed with her.
He escorted her into the interview. See, it's called an interview room. She was not handcuffed in that room. Then interrupted, stepped out. No, he stepped out and that was it. Nobody stepped in. During this break, defendant remained inside the interview room with Detective Mulroy. You're right. You are correct. Okay. Yeah, I mean, my biggest question is why, like you said, like she said, when they asked her for her name, she said, she didn't answer. And then the detectives asked her again, and she said, I'm fucking Sparkle Daniel. Like, she gave him an attitude. So what happened in that ride that made her all of a sudden just nice and compliant? That's like my biggest question. Like, why all of a sudden are you just like, yeah, no, I don't remember why I'm here.
All right.
Yeah. I'm leaning more towards upholding the decision because of all of that.
All right, so I'm going to put you on our side, the dark side, the light side.
I was trying to give up a little bit more resistance because, it's only 7:15. But it's so hard to give up resistance when it's in there.
I was actually just reviewing the state's brief, and I saying to upholding instead of being impartial, because I think the first question he asked was, do you know why you're here? And she said no. And then he said that a murder of an old lady, and then the defendant didn't answer and he left. And then when he came back and he asked her again, you know why you're here now? And then she says yes. So I feel like once he said, you're here because of some old lady being murdered, I feel like that statement is then anything after that is incriminating. Even though she had 10 minutes to think about her answer. He should have read her rights.
Got it. All right, so we got Caitlin back. Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, so I think if I'm correct, Melissa?
Yes, there is also an important fact here. Says that the detective, he has the respondent a statement sheet when he asked the question to her, why why you're here. So with the timing and everything. So it looks like he was ready to start writing what kind of statement she was about to give. So it looks like, for the facts, that he was ready to get some incriminating answer from her.
Mm-hmm.
Does it matter that when the police had her in the interview room, again, I'm trying to be impartial, that they only wrote like the time at the top of the page?
It's pretty obvious that that's what he was trying to get from her, like their answer from her.
Yeah, he could have just brought a notebook in with him. Why did he have to bring that actual form with him? If he was just looking to write some notes and get some pointers, he could have just brought a yellow pad in, and then down the road, if she decided to confess or whatever, go get the paper. Like, I've seen Law and Order. They go get the paper. It's not with them in the room. Like, you know,
playing devil's advocate, I feel like that's probably just proper procedure to bring the paperwork in with you, so that way you don't have to run out of the room and then stop them when they're starting to say what you want them to say. You know what I mean? So that just might be.
Well, there's always two people in the room with you, so if you're questioning or interrogating at that point and they start saying something that is incriminating and needs to be written down in a statement, that's what the other person should be doing, running out of the room to get the form to bring it in. And you could write it down, because yellow notepad can be admitted as well as a statement. Plus, as we see, she was also video recorded afterwards as well. It wasn't just a written statement.
Jacqueline, you bring up a good point. So I want to know, does it bother anyone that the statement or the initial interview was not video recorded? And that was a big question amongst the defense attorneys, and
that could have just played into the argument of he was just bringing her into the interview room to do just that, interview and ask questions, and he wasn't, at that point, he wasn't planning on it being an interrogation. So therefore, it wasn't, the recording hookup, whatever, was not turned on or was not present. And then after the fact, they were like, oh, she's confessing, we should probably go record this.
But don't you think after the second, like after her first statement, and then they said, that doesn't sound right, and then she gave her second statement, that's when they would have started videotaping or recording it in any way? That they didn't?
Yeah, at that point, it probably should have been recorded.
My main concern in this case is the fact that a citizen of the United States was able to get plucked off the street in one area in Brooklyn, taken 45 minutes away from her home in the middle of the day. I believe the car was unmarked by two men, handcuffed in an unmarked car, driven 45 minutes away from her home and not being told why she was driven there. Taken to, it's a scary situation. She's taken to this holding cell. She's, taken to this interview room, and, who knows what they said to her in the car. And on top of it, to add insult to injury, the police didn't feel that it was adequate or appropriate procedure to give her Miranda warnings. If they had followed police procedure, we wouldn't be here. And, that bothers me, that the decision that we come up with can affect the police's ability to just pluck people off the street and question them and do whatever without, respecting their Fifth Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm. That's where I want to lean more towards with you guys. But obviously you guys know I work with cops, so I lean more towards helping them as well. Because if we do shut this down, and every single time the cops want to talk to somebody or get a tip on the phone, that seems like it has some details to it. So this person that called had some details that were not released to the press, were not released out. So it is, this person does know something. It is a credible tip, sort of. So now if we come down with this decision, my biggest worry is, are we hindering the police from actually going and questioning this person? Because now if they would have, we don't know what happened because that's not in there, but if they would have gone to try to question her on the street, you can't question her on the street, because now even if she does confess, what are you going to do with that? You're not doing that.
I think you can still question them on the street as long as they are given their Miranda warnings. So as long as the police had followed procedure and given the Miranda warnings, then they would have been all set. Sparkle Daniel would have been in jail. But because of their neglect, now a possible murderer is running free on the street. And that's my biggest concern.
But they would have had to given her the Miranda right before they even put her in the cop car. So if we go that way, if we go that hard, and I'm not willing to go that hard where police officers have to Mirandize you even if they transport you to the precinct. I can't agree to that, because if they believe that if they have a tip and all it is a tip, but it's a credible tip, and you're a dangerous person, this is a murder we're talking about, and it's something that she obviously had no remorse about from what we've seen in the record. The police, their job is to get this person. So to get her to confess on the street is going to be worth nothing in a courtroom, because now it's just police's word versus her word. They need to get her into that interview room and they need to interview her. If they put her on the defensive by giving her the Miranda, and that puts you on the defensive. Although in this situation they handcuffed her, so the fact that they handcuffed her probably put her on the defensive to begin with. And that's, like I said in the beginning, that's one of the things that I have the biggest question about, why they did that. Because coming from a police point of view, putting the whole point of why we don't want to Mirandize you is because of the connotation of what that means. If I'm Mirandizing you, it means you're under arrest. It means you're a suspect. It means I am now interrogating you. So even when I ask you what your name is, you're going to be defensive because you think I have something on you for a crime.
Okay, so you think that putting them on the defensive hinders?
And that's one of the reasons why I don't agree with having to Mirandize right on the spot. I believe they should be able to interview you in open question.
All right, Kyle, you had your hand up.
Sorry. I just disagree with Jackie on this one, just because I understand that, it does give a negative connotation to give someone Miranda. They already are on the defensive. But it is not a difficult process for a police officer to give Miranda warnings, and I don't really think it will hinder police investigations, only because New York, just like every other state, does recognize the excited utterance exception, even though it's not in here, that it is an exception to Miranda. If a defendant says something without prompting to the police, it can be used against them. And so I really don't see the hindering issue.
But the excited utterance needs to be completely unprovoked. So if the police are there based on a tip, they're there for a reason. They already have it in their head as to why they're there. So just asking you simple questions like, what's your name and do you know anything about what goes on in this neighborhood? If all of a sudden you blurt out, yes, I do, and I killed this man, that's not, yes, it is an excited utterance, but I feel like in court, it's not going to hold up because the police had it in their head as to why they were there. And the court is going to twist that into an interrogation and questioning and not an excited utterance. And then it's going to turn into exactly why we're here. Why didn't we Mirandize? And then where does that line stop? Like if police are just looking for a criminal on the street and they just want to ask you, knowing you're completely innocent, they just want to know if you saw something. They're going to have to Mirandize you just to make sure you know what your rights are, just in case you jump up and say, I murdered a guy 4 years ago, but the Nissan went that way. It's just, I feel like this line is going to be, I'm scared that this line is going to go too far and this is going to roll.
But I still disagree because it has to be provoked. By saying, what's your name, how are you, things along that nature, there is no provocation. And if someone says something, it will be, in my opinion, it would be considered an excited utterance. If you're asking, do you know why I'm talking to you, or something along the lines of that, you want information out of them based on what information you already have. Now it's provoked. And now you need Mirandize. And that's the purpose of Miranda, is that before I try to get this information out of you, You need to know what your constitutional rights are.
But you don't think a police officer standing there in a uniform is provoking someone? I mean, we've said that seeing police officers in uniform is defensive to begin with, and people don't like cops. You know, if a cop is there, there's a problem. So if a cop just stops and asks you your name, you know, you've seen it in the YouTube videos. People automatically get defensive. They don't even want to give up anything. Even like if a cop is asking an innocent question, people get defensive.
I get defensive. I understand. So.
Yeah. So
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just scared that line's going to go too far.
Let me get Caitlin's thoughts because she's had her hand up for a while.
I think that she should have been read her Miranda warnings as soon as she listed. As soon as the handcuffs were placed on her, it takes, 2 minutes while you're putting her in your vehicle to tell her what her rights are? And then this whole thing would have been avoided. You would have had a murderer off the street, and it would have been no big deal.
Well, you
I
don't
don't think
know that, she might not have
you need to
confessed.
ask. Well, I don't think you need to ask anybody you see off the street, but if you're, if you ask her name and you're looking for and you're putting her in handcuffs, I think that you should Mirandize her just because then you completely avoid the situation.
So I would be okay to agree if we're going to write this opinion. I would be agreeing if we are tailoring the decision to these facts. The tip was extremely credible from I mean, if we're going to go that route, the tip was credible. She was put in handcuffs. We don't know why, but I wish we did. If she was put in handcuffs and she was put in a position where she felt she was going to be interrogated. So I would agree with this decision if we're going to go down that road, but we need to narrowly tailor this decision to these facts. Because if we leave it open to the fact that police are now going to have to Mirandize you, if they just start asking questions, I'm scared of that. I would like to see different facts.
I understand your concerns, Jacqueline, but I think they're slightly misplaced in the fact that I don't think we're focusing on extending the scope of Miranda. I think we're staying within the scope of Miranda, and the scope of Miranda is whether there was a custodial interrogation in this case. So if there was a custodial interrogation, if she was in custody and she was being interrogated, then she should have received her Miranda warnings. We're not extending it to say that every time the police talk to someone, they have to, read somebody their Miranda rights. But they took it a step past that in this case, and the fact of the matter is they took her into custody and asked her questions. We have no idea what transpired in the car, and they are arguing, the respondents are arguing that this is a continuous event. So because it's a continuous event, it dominoed effect, like everything was affected by that un-Mirandized statement. And if the police were to do what they are required to do, which is when they take somebody into custody and they ask them questions, give the person the Mirandized statement or, provide the Miranda warnings, we wouldn't even be here. I feel like it's a matter of judicial efficiency. I feel like they're wasting judicial efficiency because we're here because they didn't give her Miranda warnings. I feel that this didn't have to go this way if procedure was followed. And I think that's a problem. And there are several cases, and I don't know if this affects your opinion at all, but there are several cases in the United States that get overturned every year because people are not given their Miranda warnings. And with the cops being on notice of this happening, I think they would be more adamant in providing that Miranda warning. I don't know about you guys, but every time I watch an episode of Cops, as soon as somebody's in handcuffs, Miranda. They have the card, they're Miranda. So I think that if our decision would say to the cops, listen, we're on your side. We want to put away the bad guys too. We are with you. But in order for us to be with you, you have to provide this Miranda statement, because if you do not, a rapist could go walk free on the street. A murderer could walk free, in this case, possibly on the street. A child molester could walk free. And this is my concern.
And I get that. And in this case, like I said, I would be okay if we're going to go down the route that she was put in custody. And that is what I want to be clear about.
Got it. Okay.
Because that's what I'm not understanding. Because yes, she was handcuffed, physically handcuffed, which doesn't necessarily mean she was put in custody. Because when she was handcuffed, she wasn't told, or at least the record doesn't reflect it. So that confuses me. She wasn't told why she was being put in handcuffs, which is one of the things that confuses me.
So
She
you want to focus on you want to narrow it to focus on the custodial aspect of it.
Yes. So she was placed in custody, and from that point on, that should have been deemed interrogation, which I am in agreement with, because that is, if we're saying she was in custody when she was handcuffed in the back of that car, to the point of the statements, that was an interrogation, then yes, I'm okay with that. But that is, I don't want to open the door any further than that.
Okay, quick questions, guys. I'm not sure about this. Can I vote? Am I allowed to vote? Okay, so if I'm voting, I don't know, I'm the judge. I'm supposed to be partial. I'm confused. If I'm voting, then I would agree with Jacqueline and say that we should, as the majority, focus the decision on it being a custodial detention, and that's why Miranda should have definitely applied here in upholding the decision. Anyone else in the majority feel the same way? Kyle, I have a head nod. Okay. Caitlin, yes, thumbs up. Alyssa, Chris, thumbs up. All right. John, thumbs up. Melissa, how about you? Thumbs up. And then Jackie and Rachel, I'll get right back to you. I know Yusan had her hand up.
Sorry.
Yusan, you had your hand up before. Did you want to?
Oh, actually, it's a kind of silly question. Because I didn't take a look at police manual, so I'm not sure. So I just want to make sure when detective or police is supposed to give the Miranda warning to defendant.
When are they supposed to give the warning?
Yes.
It says Miranda warnings are required and should be given before each custodial interrogation. So the custodial interrogation is basically an interrogation of the defendant while they're in the police custody.
Okay. Then Jacqueline said, because she was in custody by police in the police car. So police should have given the Miranda warning to the defendant at that point. At your point, Jacqueline?
Yes, that's what I think the whole point of the custodial interrogation is if they would have just handcuffed her, put her in the back of the car, not asked her any questions at all, nothing, and then taken her to the interrogation room and then Mirandized her, this wouldn't be an issue. But as soon as they handcuffed her, placed her in the back of the car, even if they ask her what's the weather, like so how's the weather? How about them Yankees? I would think, I agree that is an interrogation, because that most likely
is backtracking then. I might be backtracking. So if they had not asked her any questions and just plucked her off the street, threw her in the car, and then brought her to the police station, then that would have been okay.
Well, that doesn't fit into this fact pattern. So in real life, yes, that is okay. It's legal for them to do that. As long as they have reasonable cause to do so, it is okay for them to do that.
What if they take the wrong person?
It happens all the time. And it's a whoops, have a nice day. Literally, that's what happens. If you fit a description, then they will give you as a human if you're arrested, and then they're just like, by the way, you fit the description of this person that we were looking for, this rapist that's out there. You kind of look like them, so that's why we arrested you. Then we brought you, we Mirandized you, which is what's supposed to happen. Then we asked you some questions and you answered, and we realized we had the wrong person, so we're just going to let you go.
I have another question. What detective detective strategy. Usually detective wanna get exact answer from defendant. They really wanna hear from the defendant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, they know which question trigger defendant kind of confession. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like what kind of interrogation?
Yeah.
So you're saying it would be like a strategy of them
Yeah.
to put people off the street.
Yeah, even though, you know what, I was really confused when I read this because only with only two questions by detective was not actually interrogation, I thought. But later on, I read one more statement. I was sure it's actually real interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read Panton case, same thing. You know what? During the break time, 2 hour break time, actually the detective interviewed Panton. Actually, they did the same thing to Panton. So I was really sure, it's a kind of detective strategy to kind of trigger defendant's confession. You know what I mean?
Got it. That could be true.
And that's why I'm in agreement with the fact that as soon as they put her in handcuffs, that was custody. They had custody of her. And from then on, even if they asked her a benign question, she should have been Mirandized before the question was asked, because it could have, like you said, it could have been a tactic. It could have just been an intimidation tactic. It could have been a situational, like take her away from her friends, take her away from, like isolate her, and then get her to confess just by chit-chatting. Because then if we go that route, then when are we going to draw the line of when is a question just an interview and when does it turn into an interrogation? Now there's too many questions that way. So as soon as we've determined that she's in custody, that's where it needs, there, like you said, custodial interrogation. So I think the handcuffs is where it is for me. If that was custody, she should have been Mirandized.
So is it safe to say that procedurally, because I feel like the big discrepancy between us all is that there's a question here of whether there was a custodial interrogation or not. There's a big question here, and that's really concerning me. And I think the facts are, they could kind of teeter either way. I mean, we don't really know what happened in the police car. We don't really know what happened in the holding cell, in the interview room. We don't really know anything until after it started being, for sure, until after the video recording started. There was a question in the record where she wasn't even read. They said they read her statement, but she wasn't allowed to read it. So the record did reflect that. So I think we are back to square one with the mixed question of law and fact. And I think that, procedurally, I feel like we can stay with uphold the decision of the lower court. Kyle, what do you think?
You want to know if we should, if it's a mixed question, we should kick it out on the procedural issue? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I do think it's a mixed question just because, it's not based solely on law, because it all depends on the facts of the case. Because she was placed in handcuffs, we were saying that she was placed in custody at that time. The facts on the record support that, so the exception for the mixed question would not be satisfied. I think it's a procedural issue, but I also like procedural law and find it really easy to rationalize with it. That could just be me, because it's so much. It is easier to kick things out on procedural issues than to go on facts. So if that's what everyone's feeling, it's a possibility. It is an issue that needs to be addressed in the majority no matter what.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking also. I don't know if we could address it in the majority and say, even if it wasn't a mixed question of law and fact, regardless, the facts are leaning more towards it being a custodial interrogation for that reason.
I think for us to, because it's a jurisdiction problem. So for us to even hear the issue, we have to decide that issue first. If it is a mixed question and the exception's not satisfied, we can't make any further findings because we don't have jurisdiction. If it is not a mixed question or the exception is satisfied, then we have jurisdiction to decide the issue. But if we decide it's a mixed question without the exception being satisfied, we can't get to the substantive issues.
Well, that places us on pickle.
So let's go the easy route and throw it out on procedure, and then that's it for the decision. No.
No. Okay, so the exception.
The exception is that the facts of the record do not support the holding of the appellate division.
Facts of the record do not support the holding of the appellate division.
Which I think they do personally.
Yeah, I think they do, because we see in the record that she was placed in custody. If that's the route we're going to go, she was handcuffed, so she was in custody, and she was asked questions, which once placed in custody turns into interrogation. So she was, no matter, I mean, even though there's questions of fact, those are not things that we have questions on.
But the custodial issue, technically, it's hard because I was just about to say it is a mixed question because it depends on what the law provides. The law is not clear on when does custody begin and when does it become a custodial interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of depends on the facts, I guess. So I guess it is a mixed question. Because the fact that she was arrested, it would make it appear as though she was in custody. But if she was not put in handcuffs, we don't think she would have been put in custody. So that is a factual issue.
That's what I'm hung up on. So I want to take a revote. I want to do a revote. So who thinks the decision of the lower court should be upheld on the grounds that we do not have jurisdiction because it's a mixed question of law and fact?
There's a little square one for...
I want to raise my hand, but I don't want to raise my hand. I don't know.
Do you think the exception is satisfied?
I don't know.
If we're arguing that the exception would be satisfied, then we would have to reverse the appellate division.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which none of us want to do.
I mean, what part of the...
You get the wrong advice,
Oh, I thought that was amazing. Jacqueline, what part of the record do you think supports the exception?
There's so much. I don't know.
We could argue that it is a question of law. We have to make a definitive stance on when custody begins. Now it's a question of law, and we're getting rid of the facts. We'd have to come to an agreement on that.
Are we allowed to change the question? Then...
Courts are allowed to do anything they want. They don't have to agree with the arguments that the appellate briefs give you.
Yeah. Because then I would...
If we did that, we'd still have to go through and say, this is when custody begins, here's the issue of law, and now we can go into the rest of the issues. Because she was in custody, now, what did the officer believe, whether it was custodial, whether she should have been Mirandized. We could go that route.
Or we could rule on whether, or just on the question of law, just on when does custody begin.
And then we'd have to discuss the application to this case.
Mm-hmm. And that's That's what I was like kind of agreeing with, because I believe in these, because like with these facts, just these facts, and they're not outside of it. Like you said, the detectives went there with premeditated thoughts in their head that she committed a crime. They put her in handcuffs and they put her in an interview room. So like those three items lead me to believe custody was there. So that's why that is a good question to answer, because I'm confident in saying yes, she was in custody.
And if we can do that route, then we're back on the same track. We can agree that this is a question of law. We have jurisdiction. We answer when custody begins, and then we move into the application to this case. And then we're saying that we're affirming the appellate division because of she was in custody and she was not Mirandized, and objectively, a police officer would have believed that he was getting information out of her that would have been related to the issue.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. The judge is confused. So why aren't we addressing the exception? If we're gonna address the question of law and say, okay, well, we're gonna rule on this issue, in order to get jurisdiction, wouldn't we need to address the exception?
No, because not if we're saying it's not a mixed question. Not if we're taking the law aspect of it and not talking about the fact aspect of it. We're just saying that custody begins at the point a person's put in handcuffs and placed in a police car. Now it's a question of law and avoiding the facts. The exception issue is, if we go with the exception, we could not affirm the appellate division because we'd be contradicting ourselves.
No, exactly. Okay. So I'm in. I'm back in. The judge is back in.
You're not allowed to be in this, no.
All right. So that being said, revote.
For the fifth time.
10th time. All right. So we got Yusan. Yusan, do you want to participate or are you voting?
No. I have a quick question.
Okay.
You know what? We don't need to state why exception is inapplicable here. You know what I mean? Even though Kyle said we don't need to mention about exception. That's gonna be a reversing, but in our brief, we don't need to mention about why exception is not applicable here, no?
I think we should mention it. I think we should mention why the exception is not applicable. What do you think, Kyle?
I don't think we should discuss it at all because we're saying that it's a question of law. The exception doesn't need to be satisfied because we're not saying that it's a question of fact at all. And I believe by putting it in dicta, stating that it's, if this was a question of fact and law, we could have done this exception, but it's not. I think it goes against all the stuff we've learned with writing opinions, how we should avoid like the what ifs.
Good point. Okay. All right. So we're gonna take a revote, guys. No dicta. Thank you, Jacqueline. All right. So revote. So all in favor of upholding the opinion on the grounds that it's a question of law and that she was in custody, and that's why we're upholding this decision upon being placed in custody. Please raise your hand.
Aye.
Jacqueline, Kyle. Right, Kyle, hold on, guys. Jacqueline, Melissa, Yusan. Okay, I got everybody's hands. I see the hands. Christopher.
What about yours?
Okay, I got mine. I'm up. Tiffany, Jacqueline, John, got it. Caitlin, yep. And I think that's it. Rachel, is Rachel still here? I can't see your hand, Rachel. No, I can. Okay, got you, Rachel. And Melissa. Okay. Rachel and Melissa. Okay, great. I think that's everybody. I think we have a unanimous opinion. right? It's everybody.
Yay!
Yay! Oh my gosh. Okay, great. That's awesome. All right, so I mean, I think we're done. I don't know. We have our opinion. We're all ruling. Does anybody else have any comments or want to find like a different reasoning why they're agreeing, or on top of the reason they like that I just voted on?
I have a question. My question is, are we going to narrowly tailor this decision to the fact that she was handcuffed, put in the back of the car, and then driven to the station? Is it the handcuffing that we're deciding on was custody, or was it the fact that they put her in the, like, if we take away the handcuffs and they just put her in the back of a squad car and took her to the station and put her in a room, are we just now, like, my question is, are we legitimately going to fit it to these facts? The handcuffs, the car, the room?
I think so. I think we agree to that.
I think we'd have to narrow it to the handcuffs, because if we don't, now anytime a person's placed in a police car, they'd be considered in custody, which would defeat your issue with when you have witnesses and things like that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's what I wanted. All right.
You could.
Are we going to include the tip as well? Is that going to be included as well in this? Like the idea of custody? I mean, because like we've said, we have no idea why she was put in handcuffs. So if a cop gets a tip and shows up to your house and they just want to ask you questions, but you start going banana nut sandwiches and throwing punches, and that's why they put you in handcuffs, not because of the tip. Like they got a tip about a murder that happened like this 3 years ago or something, and they just show up to your house to ask you to come down to the station and ask some innocent questions. So, I mean, I just want to make sure how narrow we're tailoring this decision. That's all.
I think if we were to do that, it would just be dicta again. Because now we're saying, well, if this happens, and we're trying to avoid that.
Yeah, no, what if this happened, then, okay, we're just going to stick straight to the facts. I wish we knew why she was handcuffed. Can someone find that out, please? No.
I mean, I can only imagine it's because she told the cops that she is the person of interest, and she told them to go after, I think she said, go after yourself or something. So
yeah,
that could possibly be the reason.
But I don't see how that, like, why, like, people tell cops to go fuck themselves all the time and they don't get handcuffed. So that's why I'm confused as to what extra she did. Like, she had to do something provoking other than curse. And that's
I think she was a person of interest, and I think the cops had bugged her phone. They were having Larissa Kirby call Sparkle Daniel and listening to the calls. So I think she was a person of like substantial interest, why they were so invested in arresting her. I'm pretty sure, if I remember, I'm pretty sure with the timeline that Larissa Kirby had called and gave them the information, and then that's why they were paying for her phone.
Yeah, I forgot about that. There was a lot of reading going on.
Oh yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, I forgot about that. You're right.
I have a question. Oh, that was me. Hi. Yeah, I have a question. Okay, so it's a question of law. When does custody begin? Custody begins when she's arrested and she was not read her Miranda rights. Therefore, her statement is pre-Miranda and it's tainted because it's continuous. That's the majority that we're going with?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure in case I want to write it on this one. I just wanted to have everything in it. Am I missing anything?
That's what I understood it to be. So if anyone's confused about that or doesn't agree with that, raise your hand.
I think you also have to add in the objectivity part. Just because it was raised, and I think we should at least discuss it a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
In my opinion, I don't know if you agree with me, Tiffany. What the cop objectively believed. It can be rationalized in the issue of law.
I think you're right. I don't think it would be dicta. I think we can rationalize that and say that objectively there's a good argument, there's a good faith argument that can be made that rationally a cop or a cop in his position would believe the questions that he was asking, given the information that he was given, believe that that was an interrogation and that she was in custody. So I think that wouldn't be dicta. I think that would be supporting the argument.
That is, he should have known that when he put her in handcuffs, period, that that was custody, and any question that came out of his mouth was interrogation. Like, even if he asked her how the Yankees were doing, that he should have known that that was interrogation, because it's a question that's being asked after custody begins.
Exactly. So we're going to say we're upholding.
So if there would have been, I mean, we're not putting this in the decision because it's a what if then kind of situation, but since they did put her in handcuffs, right, we're in agreement that that was custody. If she would have been given a break, like if she would have been taken downstairs to the cafeteria and fed some food and then brought back into the interview room, is she still in custody because of the original handcuffing, or is that what we're saying because of the fact that this was continuous because she never left that interview room, right? So we're saying that no matter what, because she didn't leave, the statements are part of the original, right? That's what we're saying. So if she would have been given a break, we would be okay with the fact that it erases the custody part.
Exactly. It would have dissipated the taint. So if there was a sufficient break, between, like let's say she did take a 2-hour lunch or whatever, but she was still in the interview room. If there was a sufficient break, then that would have dissipated the taint from the pre-Miranda statements. And it would have been, the post-Miranda statements would have been upheld.
Now, as a court, are we going to have to go into what we believe is sufficient break, or no? We're going to leave that out.
No, I think we would just discuss the aspect of custodial interrogation.
Okay.
He was in custody, and that because the custody was, it was continuous.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of leave the question open. Like we could also leave that as an open question to courts that have a better fact pattern. We can say, however we feel, if there was a sufficient break in between the custody and the questioning.
Exactly. That's a good idea.
We would be okay with that decision, but we'll leave that to lower courts.
I actually like that. I think
so we're basically punting it down to lower courts, saying based on the facts and the circumstances of each case, this should be decided.
Yeah. Yes.
Basis, basically.
Yeah.
I like that. How do you think we should address and I think when Jacqueline said that, this came to my mind, do you think we should address the factors given regarding the custodial interrogation, the factors that they consider? Should we be addressing each factor, do you think? I
think so, because you have to explain why it was a continuous interrogation. That is important in my opinion, to the opinion, because you got past the point of she was in custody, so it was interrogation. Now we have to put that these were all part of a continuous interrogation. Thus, all of the line of questioning is thrown out because the initial part of it was on Mirandized. You have to show the continuity aspect in order to uphold.
That's what I'm thinking. Okay. All right, sounds good to me.
Jacqueline, can you just say what you were saying before? You kind of froze on my computer and I didn't get all of it. Sorry.
What did I say? No. Well, about the brief break, is that okay? So if kind of like a what if then situation, like what if there would have been a break in between this continuous thing? Would we be okay with deleting or erasing the custody and then saying that she was no longer in custody, she was just being interviewed because she had a break? And we kind of said that we were going to punt that, like leave it open-ended and say the facts that we have her continuously in a room, However, we would have decided differently if she would have been given a substantial break. But we're going to leave it to the lower courts to define what a substantial break is.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other comments? No. Nisan?
Funny, I just wanted to add, because you mentioned about factors under poor man, we can add regarding a sufficient break issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So time difference and police personnel and a change in the nature or location of the statement and circumstances surrounding the violation. So we can add for the reasoning regarding a sufficient break.
I agree. I think that's great. I mean, I think that lines it up pretty well. We have supporting cases. We have a really strong argument why it was continuous and why it should be a question of law. And I don't see any problem with it. I just want to make sure I have all the... Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. All right. Thanks, guys. I think that's pretty much it. I think we came to a good decision. I hope I wasn't a terrible judge, even though I feel that I was. I tried. Thanks for all your help, Kyle and Jacqueline. And thanks, guys, for being so awesome and participating. I appreciate it. I think we have our decision, so I think class is over, unless Kyle, you need to do anything else.
No, you're good. I just have to save this video. I remember how to do it. So.
Yes, please save it.
Just hit end meeting. It'll. She said
download,
it.
Right?
I hope.
We'll find out.
Yeah. Good luck.
Right. Have a good night, guys.
Good night.